So that's recorded. So that's fine. As I say, if you want to ask a question, but you don't want to ask it directly, then let Dudley or myself know, and we will do that for you.
Peter, just to interject, you can either leave us a direct message in the chat box if you want, and we can ask the question, or you can put a message in the chat box as well. Just to add, Peter, some people may not get a chance to speak. So if you do also leave us a message in the chat box, we can still ask CQC or Neil, and he may be able to come back to us with an answer as well.
And there could be things that can't be answered on the day, which we can get answers and circulate later. We'll also cover some updates. We are trying to keep the news page on the website up to date, but some things are a little confusing. I'm sure a number of you have been confused by the changes with PPE, which seems to be going backwards and forwards. And I gather there are yet more changes with PPE to come. So I'm sure there's an excitement that you can't wait for. There's also a consultation on compulsory vaccination, and we'll come back to that later on. And I think we now may have Margaret Sharp with us from Skills for Care as well. Although Margaret's not actually going to speak today, Skills for Care have got some very useful information, which with a bit of luck, Margaret will be able to point you towards, which will help you in the way that you organise and run your business. Okay. The impetus for, okay. So there are an awful lot of people queuing to get in. The impetus for asking Neil from CQC to join us today was some work that LCAS have been doing with SLAM, South London and Maudsley Mental Health Trust. And this is around the mental health and well-being of social care staff, which is a key area. And I would stress that companies really ought to see their staff as an asset, not a liability. And as we move forward, it's likely that CQC inspections will start to take account of the health and well-being of staff. And you know, that's one of the reasons that we've asked Neil. And I'm sure there are plenty of questions and points that you'd like to raise with Neil. It's a very valuable and rare opportunity to have, you know, a senior CQC person that you can talk to. Dudley, if there's anything else you'd like to add, please do, and then we'll offer Neil the floor.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining this meeting. This meeting is a chance for everyone to have a say and get feedback. But the key thing is that there's not just one expert in the room. Many of us are experts. And as your colleagues as well, you get a chance in probably trying to meet with other colleagues and maybe ask questions that others may be able to answer. So we also are happy for those who may have more knowledge in a specific area to also put some answers in the group chat or leave a message. The key of this and what LCAS is about is really sharing information amongst us as managers. We've got CQC here to help us give us more direction, and also how we implement some of the strategies and thoughts and processes which some have done successfully, others may have struggled with. LCAS are independent body organization, which means that we're not judgmental. We're also here where we're able to help as well where possible. Peter constantly speaks to people like CQC, and we also try and help where we can in regards to your work, staff, and recently, as Peter's mentioned, we've really focused on well-being and mental health of the workforce, which has really been and really pushed to the limit during this whole pandemic. So thank you everyone for joining the meeting. You can also, once this is finished, we'll probably give you a recording that you'll be able to share and look back as well. And I hope you're able to get some of the answers to some of the questions that you want. So welcome everyone, and I hope you and everyone take care.
Okay, thanks, Dudley. Neil, over to you.
Okay, so how long have I got? Because I don't want to dominate your meeting, Peter.
Well,
I don't want to waffle on for too long if it's not helpful.
I think you said you had to be away by 11.
Yeah.
So we can get everything in after that. So
okay.
In that sense, take as long as you like, sir.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. And it's nice to be described as a senior member of CQC. It doesn't happen very often. But so for those that don't know me, and there will be plenty that don't, my name's Neil Cox. I'm the interim head of inspection for adult social care in London. So I'm responsible for the oversight and delivery of regulation for adult social care for the region. And I manage 10 inspection managers who manage their teams, a team of about 70 inspectors. So I was really pleased to be asked to come today and to speak on the topic that Peter mentioned. And he sent me a little an email about some of the things that he wanted me to cover, which I will try to do. And just picking up on the other points, I may not have all the answers, and I may pose more questions to you than actually answers. So I make no apologies for that, but I will try and give you a CQC perspective about how we see wellbeing for staff, how we expect providers to support them, and what we do where we find that isn't happening, and more importantly, how we can highlight the really good practice that goes on as well, because we still have to hold on to the fact that the vast majority of services in the country are providing good or outstanding care, and we want to encourage those that aren't quite there to get there. So that's, hopefully I've framed that in the right way. As has been mentioned, the pandemic has had a huge impact on society, on you as registered managers and providers and leaders of your organisations, and importantly on your staff and residents and of course their relatives and loved ones. And we at CQC do not underestimate that impact, and we try to make sure that where we take decisions around regulatory action, we factor in what is the best route to improve services where we find standards have fallen, or how we can signpost and get good news stories out as well. So there is a focus within the Commission at the moment of trying to highlight not just where we've taken regulatory action, but also to signpost providers that this is something that's really good. Others could perhaps benefit from seeing it and might wish to learn lessons from what they're doing. So in terms of how we look at wellbeing, so yes, absolutely, there is a clear link between good and outstanding providers and the culture that's generated by leaders within those organisations and staff wellbeing, and that directly impacts on a happy workforce equals happy residents. That's been clear from all our inspection activity since we started rating, and obviously before that as well. But the focus around staff wellbeing is really important. I know that in London, but also personally, the impact of the COVID pandemic has been, can't be underestimated. It's something that has brought wellbeing into sharp focus. So from our perspective, when we do inspect, and at the moment those are risk-based inspections because of the focus has to be that at the moment, we will automatically look at how the culture of the service supports their staff, not just with their well-being, but in their professional and personal development, in how they support, how you as leaders support staff to progress, but also how you consider what you can do to support them with their own well-being. And we've seen countless examples where that's been done really, really well, where there are well-being champions in place, where there is a sharp focus on staff well-being, and that directly links to happy residents, as I say, from the reports that we've published in the past. The difficulty we have is that there's no specific regulation that says well-being is something that CQC can regulate against. So when we come into a service and inspect, what I hope you experience is that inspectors will look at how staff interact. They will speak to staff about how they feel supported and valued, to try to get an understanding of how that's being done. And we always have to bring it back to impact on people. So if we find, for example, that there is no impact on people, but staff are unhappy or they don't feel supported, then actually from a regulatory perspective, it's quite difficult to take any formal action. But what I would hope inspectors do, and I'm sure they do, is that they would speak to the registered persons and say, actually, we've spoken to some staff. These are some of the themes that we're being told about. And actually, is there anything you can do to help improve either supporting your staff or supporting their well-being? The value that I know in the past that there's been some scepticism, I think, from services I've inspected personally in my other post before I joined London, about the value of wellbeing champions. Is that a tokenistic thing? But actually, it is really important that we take this seriously, and that wellbeing is considered as part of business as usual. Within CQC, as you would expect, there's a huge focus on our own staff wellbeing as well throughout, not just it's been brought into focus for the pandemic, but obviously before that as well. And we need to consider as a regulator how we can sort of spread that message as well. So it is about making sure that there's time given to discuss wellbeing, that one-to-ones that you have with your teams do ask, how are you? How are you in your, not just in your professional working life, in your personal life? And not everyone feels comfortable sharing that, and people don't have to, but it's creating an atmosphere where people feel able to talk freely about how they're feeling, for you to pick up or identify things that actually you might be able to do to improve your own staff wellbeing, which will, the end result will be a happy, supported workforce. So if it's not directly impacting on staff, on residents, then actually from our perspective, it will be a signposting. Have you considered, are you looking at other, I know Skills for Care on the call, are there other ways that you can help improve staff wellbeing? Where we see that it is impacting on staff, on residents, then we will take action. And I think it's really important that we keep the focus as a regulator on people. Yes, of course, we want to make sure we support services to improve and support those that are registered with us to do a really good job, which, as I say, the vast majority do. But where we see there's a negative impact, we will take regulatory action, and that will link to if there is a poor culture. Closed cultures are a particular focus at the moment within the Commission, and there's a huge amount of work going on about how we get under the skin of services to understand the culture. And this is where, for me, and for it's not just for me, our organisation, this is where you have the most impact and the most influence. The creation of the culture starts with the registered provider, and then to the registered manager. How do you react to things that go wrong? Is there a no blame culture? Is it about supportive? Is it supportive, and is it developing your teams? And where that isn't happening, we will comment on in inspection reports. And where we see impact of poor staff practice as a result of lack of training or lack of supervision, or all those things, we can then take regulatory action. But the starting point has to be from leaders. And when we talk about leaders, this isn't just about registered managers and registered providers. It's about deputies, it's about team leaders, it's about individual staff members who feel they have the autonomy and the responsibility to do their job and do it well, but also are able to input and affect changes within the service. And how you respond and react to that feedback from staff and how you develop that culture is obviously a matter for you. But openness and transparency, honesty is key. I've had plenty of difficult conversations, as I'm sure you have, with my staff, with those that I've regulated, and it's about how you try to support people in the right way to get where you want them to be. So that's part of, well, the main part, I guess, is the culture and how you as leaders can influence that and how you can empower your teams, because that's really what we all want is staff take up a huge amount of time, quite rightly, in supporting, in training, and making sure they've got the skills and capabilities to do the role. But it's that ongoing continued support that will actually impact positively if you're considering well-being as well. So that's my thoughts, or the CQC's thoughts around it. It is about, as I say, impact on people. We will take action where we need to, but it's thinking about, for you, how do you get the best out of your teams? How do you listen to your staff, and how do you encourage them to be the best they can be in work? And those are the conversations I have with my teams, empowering them to, I'd like to think, empowering them to do what the right thing, but also having difficult conversations when you need to, but understanding each one is an individual, and each person has their own pressures, their own personal circumstances that might impact on how they do their job. And that's really a fine art, isn't it? Trying to manage all those things to get the best out of your teams. So that's the bit around well-being for me. I guess I know that there's been there were some comments, Peter, about, or in your email to me, about how do you get staff to engage in the well-being conversation, and that there's some concern about staff just don't understand it or don't get it. Well, for me, that comes back to you as registered people. How do you explain to staff the importance? How do you get them to understand that actually it's vital that their well-being is considered, and that they do have training that helps them consider that, whether that's seen as a mandatory thing or not, that's a matter for you to decide. But actually, how do you get people involved? And if you've got a closed culture, or if staff don't feel able to speak to their managers, or those that are their direct line manager, about things that are worrying them or troubling them, then they won't engage. And it's difficult to do, and it's not something that can be done quickly sometimes. So culture is a thing that has to be developed over time. And where we see poor examples of poor culture, and we've made a rating, for example, of inadequate for whatever reason, CQC does not expect that 2 months' time everything will be fixed. What we expect is that there will be those ongoing supportive discussions to try to address it. But it's something that has to be nurtured. And I'm going to teach you to suck eggs here, but trust is really, really difficult to get, and it's really, really easy to lose. And how you do that, and how you influence those that you lead is absolutely vital. So apologies for telling you things that I'm sure you already know, but it's a massive challenge, and something that we will, as I say, when we inspect, we will look at culture, we will look at how staff are supported. And if you have questions on when you're being inspected about what can you do, then have those conversations with inspectors, because they will be able to perhaps give you a light bulb moment of, oh, actually, let's try this, or they may say, they may be able to signpost you to another provider that's done something really well. But forums like this are really important, because that collective sharing of how you do things, and how you share those ideas of what works well, and just as importantly, what hasn't worked well, is really key. So I'll just encourage that continued conversation. Last point for me on wellbeing will be one thing I have on my team meetings. It's a standing item on the agenda, is wellbeing, and it's not a 5-minute standing item. It is a dedicated amount of time where people are able to tell me and their colleagues how they're feeling, if they've got stuff going on, if they feel able to share, so that others know and understand and can and respond appropriately with support. So it's that taking away what can be perceived sometimes as a token of well-being. It's 5 minutes as an agenda item. It's giving it that value and importance when we discuss it. So that's the well-being bit, Peter. Whether people have got some questions or reflections or comments, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Neil. I'm sure there are, or there really ought to be, but I know that Dudley has had one or two passed to him. So if you want to fire those off, Dudley, and kick the rest of it into action.
Oh, thank you very much, Neil. I think it's really great, really touching on the notion of well-being and being recognised by CQC, but also personally within your organisation as well, amongst your own team, really shows the value of well-being and mental health presently that's taking place in this space. And I'm sure you're fully aware, and probably most people on this Zoom meeting, is that we've been through a lot of change during the last 12 months, or maybe 14 months now, with the pandemic. And we've been asked to work above and beyond what we normally and usually need to do. And I think if everyone was, if we all were to raise our hands and ask if we've had moments where we've had to struggle with our mental health or stress or anxiety, I think most of us would put our hands up. So it's really great to see that. So I guess some of the questions that I've had are more to do with being CQC. A lot of us as the providers look to CQC for help and direction. And as regulators, you've mentioned incorporating or having a look at things that we could do within our own sort of workplace. Is there something that you would ask us that we could do, that we could show to our inspectors or showcase, that would be helpful for us and when inspectors come in to inspect us?
That's a really difficult question, actually, because the majority, yes, I'm sure there are things you can do that demonstrate that, and things like, it's not about records. I don't want it to be about, but showing how you make sure that well-being is given, or staff support and well-being is given the focus it needs to be. Because absolutely, I mean, some of the conversations I've had with my teams about the pressures and the fantastic job that providers have done through the pandemic under the most horrendous circumstances on some occasions. Absolutely, my hats off to all of you that work in the care sector. You've done a fantastic job. And what we don't want to be seen as, and I hope we're not, I'm sure some will feel that we are, but I don't want to be seen as a tick box regulator. This is about people's experience of care. This is about making sure that people get the high quality care that we, all of us want to deliver. But there's the usual things you can show in terms of staff meetings, minutes around things that you've done to encourage well-being, or to the records-based bit. But actually, the most important thing, the most telling thing for us will be staff telling us. So, with the best will in the world, we could be presented with a whole file of all the fantastic stuff that's gone on, and that's great. But actually what we want to hear from as well is from staff, individual staff members. How do they see that they're being supported? And in the same way that getting people's direct experience of care is the most impactful, that is the same with staff. So I think it's more about, how do you encourage your staff on inspections to talk freely to inspectors about how they're feeling, to feel that actually by telling us how things are for them personally, just in their role, how they're being supported or not, and it may be that people don't feel supported and managers don't know about it. So, how do we encourage staff and get that feedback from them? So for me, it's a lot of it is around how they interact with inspectors on inspections, because there is that understandable fear factor of, oh no, CQC are here, what do I do? So there's a coaching role for me for registered managers and leaders about, how do you prepare your teams to showcase not just the great care that they give, but also to showcase all the stuff that the organisation does for them to help them do their job. And that for me is far more powerful than a file that says, here are all the minutes of the meetings where we discuss wellbeing. So it's that balance, isn't it? Of course, we need to be reasonable and practical and pragmatic about things, but staff voice is going to be the most powerful way. And by you encouraging your teams to engage with inspectors, to be honest about how they've been supported, and the good job that you do to support them, that's one of the most important things, if not the most important. So it's probably not an answer, I'm afraid, but records are great. record. Don't get me wrong, there's absolutely there's a place for them, but it's about people's experience and staff experience that is going to be probably more beneficial for inspectors to hear and understand.
Thank you, Neil. I think someone in the group chat has mentioned quality assurance, look at feedback from staff and clients. I think one thing that I think CQC have always asked, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. And I think as providers in their own right, you can have quality assurance surveys, feedback forms from not just people coming, visitors, your own staff. And I think this is something that you can present, and even for yourselves to look at to see where maybe things are not working or could work or change. Yeah,
absolutely. So please, I don't want the takeaway message to be you don't have to worry about records, because that's not the case. But I think what I'm saying is I have been to, and I was an inspection manager in Surrey before I came to London, and prior to that I was an inspector. So I will use Surrey as an example. I've been to some really fantastic services in Surrey, and I've been to some really, really poor ones where we had to take urgent action to close, and it's been appalling. And I've been to everything in between. And I think one of the things that I reflect is that actually you can be presented with something that has got, that is a quality assurance file that says, actually, this is what we do. What I'm after and what CQC is what have you done as a result of that quality assurance? What the you said we did bit of it, really. So if you have got these systems in place, which I'm sure you will have, it's the actions that have been taken as a result of those assurance processes that are key. So you can have the most fantastic quality assurance process in the world, but how do you use it, and how do you act on it? Because if you've acted on it, fantastic. If you haven't, then there's a gap, isn't there? And similarly with staff and people and relatives feedback, we routinely get presented with, these are the surveys we did, and that's fantastic, and that's what we would expect. But what I would also do is closing the loop. What have you done as a result? So it's that part of it, and we will hear that from people we speak to, from staff. They will tell us, we've said to the registered person, or we said we want this done, but nothing's ever been done about it. So it's just about making sure you're not only actively listening to what your staff and people are telling you, but also you're taking action where you can. And of course, there will be instances where you can't resolve something, or you can't do something. But it's what happens as a result of something. That's what we're interested in. And all these good or outstanding services have nailed that. They understand that, and they get that actually, yes, we've done a piece of work. What's it telling us? What are we going to do about it? And it's that continual improvement piece that is really important.
And I think if I would add, or I could add, from the number of care homes and dom care providers, etc., that I have visited and talked with, if I get a similar message from staff that I'm getting from the manager or the owner, that I would say is a standard good sign. If the manager is saying X and the staff are saying something completely different, I am thinking, hang on, there's an issue here. And if the owner and the manager are at odds about what they're saying, there's a real issue. And sometimes managers need to perhaps look in the mirror, because they are not always the solution to the staff problems. They can be the problem themselves. And I think Brian James from Keychange has put a point in the chat. With the post-pandemic pressures of occupancy and marketing, where people do not recognise the value of care communities, there's a risk that pressures will be even greater than the last 18 months. Please keep this focus on well-being through into the future. I think that's a very important point. And I think that many people in social care are saying, what Dudley and I are picking up from the work that we've been doing, is that as the pressure of the pandemic ebbs away, the good old NHS is, wonderful, whereas social care is basically just supposed to get back in its box and carry on with next to no money and very few staff and little support. And that's not going to happen, because apart from the fact that we have registered managers who are aging, we have staff and managers and owners that have suffered a huge amount of pressure, and the financial pressures from banks, etc., are yet to emerge on the scene. And that affects not just those that are technically for profit. I have had similar conversations with not-for-profits and with charities who are also very concerned about their way forward with staff and with finance. And I think Dudley will probably support this, but the work that we as LCAS have done with SLAM, as we excuse me, as we've gained the confidence of managers and owners, they've been quite forthright about their concerns going forward. And many of them, whilst they worry about their business, you know, the money side of it, many of them, their key concern is about the staff. You know, if we've had staff that have been here for 20 years, if this business fails, what will they do? And that's one of the things that's keeping them awake at night. So do talk to your staff, do keep them in the loop.
Yeah, I can't stress enough openness and transparency, and that sometimes leads to really, really difficult conversations, but actually that's the right thing to do. And you know, if in throughout my CQC career and before that, but actually, what's the point of not telling people what's going on? I mean, there are obviously some sensitivities around some things that you can't tell people everything. Clearly that's the case, but actually we need to be open to open with our teams where we can, and be seen to be someone who they can talk to about anything. And you know, I'm teaching you everything you already know, I'm sure, so apologies, but it is really important. I know that, well, I like to think that my teams have got an open line. If they need to speak to me about something that's troubling them, be it personal or be it through work related, they will just pick up the phone and talk to me about it, or we will meet or whatever. So meet virtually at the moment, obviously. So it is about just keeping that that approach, which is really difficult to do. It has to be said. It's not you know, the job you do is difficult without any shadow of doubt, and it's not always easy to do the right thing, but difficult conversations are part of the role, I guess. So it's just, as I say, staff will appreciate, or staff do appreciate, that honesty and openness. Yeah. And it does, staff talk to each other, don't they? I mean, I know my teams talk to each other, and I hear snippets and think, oh, okay. But actually spreading staff influencing certain staff is important as well. So, because the message spreads, and it will take one thing that hasn't gone too well, or has been delivered not in the way that you had hoped, or whatever it might be, that will sort of cause staff to think, oh, actually, but I can't raise that, or I can't say this. But it's just about trying to do your best all the time, which I'm absolutely sure you all do anyway.
Yeah.
I think we've got a question, because I know time will run down, and there's another question I've got to ask for you as well. But I think Brian James has got a question. I'm not sure if you can unmute. And you want to raise a question for Neil.
If it was okay, yeah, it was just really building on what you just said, Neil, because we're a charity, not for profit. We've got 11 residential care facilities, one in Southwest London in Wimbledon. And we were able to invest in our wellbeing strategy and a wellbeing lead. But one of the things we found was when we went for the wellbeing champion role, is we actually determined that actually none of them were necessarily in leadership teams in any of our 11 communities. They were all, if you like, staff reps. So they were nominated by the team as somebody who was a good listener. And so our wellbeing lead pulls those 11 wellbeing champions together on a regular basis. I actually think the pandemic's helped us to connect people much more effectively across our group. So those 11 people with the wellbeing lead get together at least once every 3 or 4 weeks, and they've had skills training in terms of where matters are confidential, what line certain information should go down, what route it should go down. But their primary focus and description is all about their role as a wellbeing lead, and they are an everyday ordinary colleague of other people in their team. And that's gone down really well. So we kind of felt that was a very definite need to invest in that for this financial year, because we think the pressure is going to be significant this year. We've already made redundancies in one location due to loss of income over in Gloucester. and we think that that's potentially going to be a challenge throughout the year ahead.
Yeah, and that sounds like a fantastic idea. And when I talk about wellbeing champions or wellbeing leads, or this isn't empowering staff to do that and undertake and giving them that sense of responsibility is really important. As registered managers, you can't do everything. I mean, I'm sure you delegate a lot of tasks. I mean, I like to think that I've got a handle on everything that's going on in my part of the world, but actually I have to trust that my teams are doing what I ask them to do, and I delegate that responsibility and empower them to say, okay, off you go. That's your bit of work. You're responsible for it, and that builds confidence. That builds trust. So no, I think that's a great idea. It doesn't always have to be someone in a leadership position. It could be someone who is identifying the right person for that. I think is more important.
We've recently, the work we've done, we've trained about 100 wellbeing champions, and of those, and I would support what Brian had said in that they weren't managers, they were members of staff, and a number of them have already come back and said, what's the next stage? Where can we learn a bit more? Can we have an action learning set that runs forward with this, which will then take over a period, so they get a couple of hours this month and a couple of hours next month? And that's something that we're putting together. And that's really useful, because all these things contribute to keeping staff on board, and staff retention is vital.
Yeah.
And getting staff is difficult. Getting staff is very expensive.
Yeah, I mean, I would mirror what Peter said. I think it's great. And you said something earlier, Neil, about embedding a culture in your organizations. And I think, unfortunately, we've just had to get on along with things over the last 12 months. But the culture is going to be long lasting. If you can embed a culture where your staff feel they can speak to someone or they're able to open up, that'll be more beneficial to you going forward than anything else. So it's definitely something I would ask and applaud most providers to try and invest in some shape or form. Make time for it, because it's really going to be something that's going to carry you through for the next. The last month was built on resilience. The next 12 months are going to be built on something more than just that. You're going to really need your staff to be behind you. You're really going to have to support them, but they'll be supporting you as well. So
No, I completely agree, and it is that allowing staff to, or those that are in those roles, to be able to. Our chief executive calls it speaking truth to power, and it's been, when your wellbeing leads or reps or however you do it within your own organisations, is do they feel able to say, actually, this is what we want. This is what the action learning set sounds like a fantastic idea. So, but yeah, being able for them to freely say, we've discussed this would help, and how that is received, again, will help determine whether well-being is seen as being something that's taken seriously by the organisation or not. And you can't facilitate everything, because there's clearly that's not reasonable to say we want to do X, Y, and Z, and if you can't support that. But it's about having those conversations about we can't do that, but what can we do then? Is there a way? Is there a middle ground if it's too expensive or it's too difficult to organise? So, but it's that focus on, is it being seen as being taken seriously, and which is really key. And I've within my own management team, I've set up. I have a weekly hour. It's always on a Friday afternoon, a weekly hour where we have a wellbeing hour, and I've forbidden work to be spoken about, because we discuss about all the stuff that's going on during the week. So that's an hour where the team can just sit down, reflect, have a moment, just check in with their colleagues and just have a normal conversation, if you look, for want of a better word. But it's about how you then allow your teams to reflect on the absolute stresses and strains that the pandemic has caused. That period of reflection is important, allowing people to speak openly about that as well. So if you haven't done that already, I would really encourage that. What have people learned? How do people feel about? I'm sure everyone on this call has been directly impacted in some form or another by COVID. I mean, it's touched everyone, hasn't it? And I led a wellbeing call with my team about where my sister's in a regulated service. She's got a profound learning disability, and I hadn't seen her for months. And the impact on her and my mum and my family was huge, because my mum used to see it pretty much every day. But just being honest about how it's affected you as well encourages that conversation, and encourages, oh, actually, yeah, I may be, as Peter described me, a senior person within CQC, but I'm just a normal person that's actually got the same pressures that everyone else has. So it's that encouraging and discussing and openness that, you know, I know I'm whistling on about it, but it really is important.
Yeah, and I think Sarah Larden has put a point in the chat about having previously challenged our inspector. It was great being supported by CQC to speak up. Now, I know from conversations with CQC that CQC want providers, if you like, to complain about inspectors because it keeps the standard up. And when I have talked to providers who have said, we don't like what the CQC inspector said, I don't automatically take their side. I need to try and be an honest witness to this because I wasn't there at the time. But I also find that by talking to staff, sometimes staff will say, well, I think the manager's got it wrong. You know, the CQC inspector was right. If I find that everybody is telling me the same story, then I would be prepared to support a challenge. But I think before challenges are made, one needs to look at the background to it. And we keep coming back to organizational culture and ethos. And, you know, one of the first questions I sometimes ask providers is their staff turnover percentage. And that gives me an indication. They think it's ridiculous, but it's an indication of how well that business is or charity is actually run.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Peter, I am in no way saying that CQC gets it right every time and that we don't make mistakes or things don't happen, because we are dealing with people. We're dealing with people that are, you know, that are trying to do their best for what they perceive to be the right reasons at the time, and we don't always get it right. So if there are instances where the conduct of the inspection has not been what it should have been, my expectation on registered people is to say they need to raise that directly with the inspector at the time it happens, so that they can, because it could be a misunderstanding, it could be a poor choice of words, it could be something that is absolutely unintended, but it causes an issue. So there's a bit about, for me, I absolutely encourage providers, if an inspector on an inspection says something or you're not happy with it, then the first point you have to make, and this goes back to that difficult conversation, is, can we just speak about what you just said there? Can I just understand what you mean by that? Because this is how I've perceived it. This is how I've taken it. To try, because I'd like to think that of the inspectors in London and across CQC, we don't go out intentionally to upset providers and make them angry. What we're trying to do is we've got to do our job, is to understand, and it could be a simple misunderstanding, or it could be a learning point for an inspector that might need to be picked up by their manager. But actually, if we don't hear about it at the time, then of course you've got I would actively encourage people to raise that with either the inspector at the time, preferably, and if it's not resolved, or if you feel it's not being dealt with, then with their inspection manager, and ultimately there's a complaints process. But what we want to do is be seen to be listening, but also we have a job to do. We just want to do it in the best possible way. But I absolutely acknowledge we don't always get it right, and it would be wrong of me to sit here in front of you and say CQC is right 100% of the time. So, you know, because we're dealing with people. But it's that conversation.
Thanks for that, Neil. Listen, Neil, it wouldn't be fair if we let you come here without the other questions which people wanted to ask. And CQC, for all the great things that you're doing, there are obviously questions that people are maybe slightly upset with CQC, and the pressures that we're all experiencing. Now we understand inspections are opening up again, and for some, PIR is coming into place, which adds more pressure. Being connected with over 15 boroughs in London, a lot of managers are quite nervous about the PIR, how it's meant to be filled out after what's going on with the pandemic, the support from CQC, once again being judged. And obviously, after all their hard work, it comes down to being victimized or being looked at victimized again. So the question I'll ask you is, obviously, question one would be, a lot of people was, the PIR, how is it to be sort of judged, and how will they be able to fill it out? And you can answer that. And the other question is, with the inspections going back to normal, a lot of feedback I had was that the emergency support framework was quite different, but quite refreshing, because they were phoned by an inspector. They were asked almost questions which was, we asked them how they were doing, how things were, how they coped, which almost provided more of a human side of CQC and the inspector. Going forward with inspections, how can you incorporate a similar sort of culture of inspections that allows us to relate to our inspectors rather than feeling us against them? So I'd leave you those sort of two questions, which a lot of providers have sort of worried and concerned about going forward.
Thank you. That's a nice, easy question. Thanks for that. So the PIRs, my understanding is they're voluntary at this stage. So they're not a mandatory. I can double check that, but my understanding was that those PIRs that have been sent out do not have to be completed if you haven't got capacity to do it. But I will double check and come back to you, Peter, just to confirm that. So from the PIR perspective, hopefully that will reassure, but I will just double check to make sure I haven't got my messaging completely wrong. In terms of what we're after, and so the ESF comments. So quite rightly last year, we paused inspection activity and went into emergency support framework. It's there, it says it in the title, doesn't it? Supportive, that supportive conversation around to understand and to check in with providers during the height of the pandemic. But what we have to do is consider that actually we are a regulator, and there's a balance to be had there about how we support providers and engage and contact them, as well as fulfilling our purpose to regulate, to make sure that people get the care that they expect. And that's a tricky balance. And we were in a different space last year, where we took an organisational decision. This is how we would work, but we're moving back into the regulatory space now because lockdown is starting to ease. You know, the pressures aren't as they were, albeit different pressures. That being said, my expectation of inspectors is that there will be those that there may not be the formal ESF calls that you will receive regularly, but the ongoing conversations that you have with your inspectors should continue. So the ESF calls that were made, that we had a schedule of them, or we had a set. Like, these are the ones that need to be done, and so most people will have been contacted. There is no program of ESF or contacts that inspectors now have. We are, as we move into almost not business as usual, but into inspection activity, we haven't got the capacity to do that. So my expectation of my teams is, though, that the principles of support and engagement should remain. So those conversations, if they're needed, should be had. So if you have a particular issue, or if you're worried about something, whatever, I would encourage you to contact your inspector and, you know, pick up the phone and speak to them, because that will help build the relationship with the inspector that has that manages or has oversight of your service. The thing to note, though, is that, as with other organisations, we're looking at capacity and how we manage our way out of essentially a backlog. So it may not always be the inspector that you speak to on the phone that's going to cross the threshold. And that comes back to bringing it back to what we were talking about earlier, is how you then build a relationship quickly with someone that you may not know, but also how you engage and interact with them in terms of openness and transparency about, you know, particular issues or challenges you may have in your service. So it's not going to be the same inspector we will see every inspection. And to be honest, our inspections are limited to quite a strict set of criteria at the moment, because we haven't got capacity to get round to everyone that we need to. And it is our new strategy sets out, we're moving to this risk-based model of regulation. That's going to continue. There's a transitionary approach at the moment, but once the consultation has been reviewed and the response is reviewed, then more information will come out about that. But regulation is changing. The way we do it is going to be changing. You know, we're going to have a focus on care in an area. So whilst we'll always retain the locations that we will inspect, it's not necessarily going to be how it was before. So again, I think I've probably strayed off point a little bit, but if you feel that the conversations you're having with your inspector are not helpful, then again, for me, it's about, okay, when you're speaking to your inspector, you're telling them that and explaining why you think it's not helpful. The inspectors can only do so much within their area of responsibility, and our legal, obviously, what we can legally do as a regulator. But it's really important that we have those open conversations. But there won't be a program of every month you'll get a call, unfortunately, because that's not the space we're in at the moment. So hopefully I've answered the question.
Okay. I mean, I know you said you'll come back to us. I think someone's mentioned the group. If you mentioned the PIR is obviously voluntary, if someone wasn't to fill it out, what impact would that have on the outcome of their inspection? If it
no impact at all. No. If you think that if you don't fill in a PIR that's been sent out on a voluntary basis, there will be a negative connotation, but it won't be. And if it is, I'd like to know about it, but I can give you that assurance because it is voluntary. Of course, the more information we have, the better we can understand services. If you can complete it, fantastic. But if you can't, you can't.
And does that go also as well, if you can only complete, for example, 50% of it or 60% of it, it won't have an impact on you not filling it in full?
If it's voluntary, absolutely. If it's mandatory, then we may then, what it may do, once we move back out to the mandatory PIRs, and I'm not suggesting that's going to happen anytime soon. I'm not sure of the latest messaging on that. But what it might do is prompt some questions ahead of an inspection to try and understand what's been provided, or it might prompt further questions on inspection.
Just on the PIR, which is a minor point, because I haven't seen one for a while, but I wasn't sure that you could actually move through it without completing all the questions. And when you got to the bottom of a page, you had to go forward. You couldn't save it without having done part of it and then come back and do bits of it later, which would make life a lot easier for some people. You know, do the easy bits, then come back and do the others. But I could be wrong.
You mean the technical side of things, which I think everyone probably complained about. Neil, I'm sure you've probably heard as many gripes as possible about saving, keeping, some information being lost, come back next week and it's all gone. So I think people were fearing the dreaded PIR and the whole IT side of things with CQC. I don't know if you're in a place to answer such a question, but I know people were nervous.
No, I'm not in a place, but I can certainly find out where we are in terms of the changes to the PIR about the saving bit of it, because I know that we did get a huge amount of feedback, or have had a huge amount of feedback, not just from London's providers, but across the country. So if you can leave that with me, I can let you know what the latest position is in terms of the technical side of it, but I'm not up to speed on it, I'm afraid.
Listen, I know you've got probably about 3 minutes to go.
I've just had a cancellation. I've got 10 minutes actually,
wow.
if that helps. But
it's all of a sudden people having a voice. There's lots of questions coming through. Just really mainly on inspections itself. One, in regards to inspections be conducted more remotely in future. That's one of the other questions that someone's just asked very quickly.
Okay. No remote inspection. There may be aspects of the inspection that will be remotely, but we still need to cross the threshold, and will do. In what form that takes will depend on the service type, obviously. Clearly, we're going to come out to every care home, but for domiciliary care services, it may be a short office visit, but we are limiting the amount of time we're spending on site, but there has to be a crossing of the threshold for us. So that will continue. Or, as I say, that we had a pilot going on about domiciliary care services, where it's not all done virtually, but at the moment that was a pilot and that's ended.
Okay.
Brian has
just question very quickly, sorry, please, just to quickly before you go in there, which you might be able to help us with, and you can signpost. could you be more specific about risk-based inspections and what will trigger inspections? I don't expect you to answer it all now because we haven't got the time, but I know that regulation, and you can probably signpost and give us information where they can look, or we can find out what you're doing at the moment, presently.
Okay, so the new strategy consultation sets out our ambition to be a more flexible and risk-based regulator. And I'm not going to lie to you, none of the detail is available to me because we are going through a series of changes internally, looking at how we get the intelligence bit done right to inform our approach in the future. So at the moment, the tools we have at our disposal are the same as they have been, which is we rely on information in the PIR where it's completed, but feedback from people, from relatives, safeguarding notifications, all those things form a picture of a service. And then it's for the individual inspector to decide, actually, does this mean that there's an emerging risk here? And do I need to do something about it? Be that contact with the service, be that focused inspection, whatever. So I have no detail on what it's going to be. And I can assure you, if I did have, I would tell you, but no, that's still being worked through. But actually, we do need to look at data plays a really important part in how we monitor services. But there's also the human element of inspector that will have to analyse that to make a judgment. Do we need to do something? So the data you send in via notifications, etc., is all used. We've got a huge amount of intelligence that comes into us, and we're now looking at what's the best way and what does it tell us about the service and how do we use it. But that's not been determined as yet.
Thank you. And Peter, I think you wanted to raise a point that you made in the chat box.
Yes, Brian James sent from Keychange sent a point on to me, which I think is useful. So I've shared it. And the other point I would make, and I sort of make quite often, is that across this meeting, there's 100 people. There's a huge amount of expertise, and you will all have questions, and many of those questions will be able to be answered by your fellow managers. Now, I know we can't at the moment have face-to-face meetings, but you can ring people up, you can pose questions on WhatsApp, etc. And you will find that people are very, very helpful, and your fellow managers want to see you succeed because they don't want there to be poor quality out there. They don't want to be a flush of failures. So share the expertise that you have and ask questions, and other people will help you with that. They'll help you to support your business.
And I actually agree. I mean, part of LCAS is that we are a group of registered managers put together across most of London, at least half of London. And between you, if there's just 100 here, but there's many more who've experienced things. Some who've actually had a PR already or started to fill it out. Some who've experienced talking with inspectors. Sharing this information is vital. If we look at it, the government and put a lot of pressure on us, and we've managed to cope. So fundamentally, we should be able to cope with what else, anything that's been thrown at us. So, but the key thing is if we don't communicate and we don't share that, and that's speaking with staff, getting your culture right, then it just makes it so much more difficult for all of us. I think it's great we've got CQC here. Probably even Neil will tell you he hasn't got all the answers, but also if we give him feedback, he can take it back to CQC and try and address some of the issues or concerns that we have as well. So it's really key to share information and also give him sort of answers of things that have worked well for us within our sector as well.
No, I would agree with that. I certainly don't have probably 2% of the experience that's on this call. So no, absolutely, you're the experts. I'm a regulator. Yes, I have experience in the field of adult social care, but actually you're the one that delivering that hands-on care and doing such a fantastic job. If there's issues that you have about specific things, then that a barrier, then you need to tell me via Peter, tell me about it, and I can take that back, because it's important that I'm a voice for ASC in London as well. It's not just about I'm here to represent CQC. The comment about all I think we mentioned earlier about all the bad news stories about the sector and under pressure. Actually, we need to we need to fight for ASC as well. We're not a second-rate citizen. We're a vital part of a health and social care system. So if there's things that you need to be that are causing you difficulty or trouble, please let Peter know, and he can pass it on to me, and I can then raise that, because we obviously speak with Department of Health and Social Care regularly, you know, and we need ASC's voice to be heard.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think it seems as if time is, I mean, we'll leave you as long as you can answer questions. And
I've got an appointment at 15:15. Actually, it's been rearranged, so I can 5 more minutes if that's okay. If it's not helpful, I can go now. It's not a fright.
That's fine. I think the point I wanted to raise is that we probably would ask for you, if kindly, to come back at some point where you we'll probably give you more questions ahead of time. I think it's really key, but we're open for anyone who probably may want to ask a question or ask anything directly in the chat box. Now is a time to raise it. There was a question that I did have that someone wanted to ask. This is to do with registrations and the time frame of being registered now, because lots of people are now wanting to open up services and apply to be managers. And can you just give people general feedback on that process and time frame presently?
Yes. So we recognise registration is an issue. Absolutely. We've been focusing throughout the pandemic on those registrations that are going to have that are required to be done quickly, but we have a backlog. I'm sure that most of you must be aware of this, but there is a plan at the moment to try and address that. I think applications I know applications are being prioritised by date order now. They weren't before. We took a slightly different approach where we needed to register services quickly with the Nightingale hospitals, etc., when we had to do quick registrations. But there is a backlog, and I can come back to you with what those delays are currently via Peter, if that's okay. But it's a huge focus for us at the moment, because we know that we're not performing as we wish to. If there are specific people that have been waiting exceptionally long times, if they can let Peter know, and I can then take that back to my registration colleagues.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I think there's been a lot of people trying to do that.
And I think Chipper has a question.
Yes, I do have a question. It might be a comment or question. It's regarding staff well-being or well-being in general. I understand that most families that we're working with are expecting support workers or people that work with the families to be immunized against COVID. And I particularly have found it difficult to convince the support workers to get immunized. I wonder how this could be addressed and how this can impact on staff well-being.
So, well, from I know that there's a huge amount of work that's gone on with the London ADAS group about trying to bust some of the myths that are out there about the vaccine. As I'm sure you're all aware, there's a government consultation about mandatory vaccinations that I won't comment on, because that's something that hasn't been agreed or decided just yet. For me, there are tools available, and I know that ADAS sent something out, didn't they, about how you can try to have those conversations with staff about their reasons for not wanting the vaccine, and how you can try and encourage them to or discuss openly about what those issues are. But I would, it may be that your colleagues on the call will have some really good ideas about how they've managed to engage with staff and get them to be vaccinated. So it's probably a better question for other people on the call.
And certainly I have spoken to a number of people, and I know Dudley also has, but with some providers, the difficulty was actually getting the staff to the point of getting vaccinated. And if the company, which can be difficult, covered the time that it took them, i.e. paid them to go and be jabbed then they went quite happily. And some of them actually just bribed them. They paid them and they gave them a tenner. And they went off quite happily and had their jab.
Go on, Neil.
No, I'm just going. I'm not going to comment. It's for providers to decide how best to support the vaccination program, in whichever way that keep staff happy and gets people vaccinated. Okay,
there were 2 other questions I had directly. There was one in regards to the focus of inspections. Are they still going to be on infection prevention control? Obviously, in light of COVID, is that still the case? One of the main strands for inspectors in going into when they are going to inspect services now.
So for all care home services, there will be a specific set of questions around infection control. So that will continue, but there will not be specific, or there may be the odd one, assurance visits. But we've stopped doing the infection prevention control assurance visits, or paused them temporarily, recognising what's going on in the world around us, that we needed assurance for a period of time. So that has slowed significantly, if not stopped. That's not to say that there won't be the odd occasion where we might need to just nip out and make sure. But yes, of course, we're going to focus on COVID measures that are in place at services, and also the wider infection control piece, because I know that I was speaking to someone a couple of weeks ago where there was an outbreak of norovirus, which is the first one I'd heard of throughout the whole winter, which is interesting. So it's not just about COVID, but of course our focus is going to be in the main on COVID IPC measures. But good infection control should be a given anyway. And it's about commenting on the whole piece around Regulation 12 and how you're assuring yourselves that people are safe from those IPC risks. So it's not just, but yeah, you would expect us to focus on COVID more than anything else at this moment in time, particularly with the new strains that are coming out. It may well be we might need to ramp that up again, but we should see.
And the other question that I found is, I'm not sure your take or CQ's take on the proactiveness, for example, care homes have had in regarding facilitating relative visits. Now, obviously, they're beginning to come into play again presently. I'm not sure CQC does take that into account or ask any questions around or look at that.
I'm glad that question's been asked, because it's a huge focus, and Kate Taroney appeared before the Harriet Harman yesterday in Parliament about a joint committee on human rights. And it's generating a huge amount of social media noise about visits not being facilitated. And I'm not suggesting in London, I'm just talking about generally. So we routinely, as you would expect, get contacted by relatives who are telling us, no, I'm not allowed to visit my loved one. Now, I haven't seen that that's been a particular, or I haven't heard it's been a particular issue in London. And I think the vast majority of cases where I've heard about it, it's been a misunderstanding of either of the guidance or a misunderstanding of between the manager or the provider and the person who wants to visit. Because obviously it needs to be managed carefully and in line with the government guidance. So yes, it may be that, it will be that we will be having a focus on this in the going forward, and we would expect all providers to follow the government guidance in relation to visiting, and we will probably contact those where we hear that that's not happening. And as I say, all the cases I've heard around London, there's been a confusion and it's been a misunderstanding rather than providers not wanting to do it, because it's not an easy thing to facilitate in a really large service, or where you've got particularly complex needs, or all those sorts of things. So we will take a pragmatic approach to it, but it's about understanding what the situation is, because I'm not aware that there's been an actual blanket visiting ban imposed in London at all. And if you're not facilitating visits, then we would, just to be clear, we would expect you to be doing that wherever possible, unless there's reason not to, and that would be obviously due to any outbreaks, etc. But does that help?
No, that's fine. I think there's still going to be questions which are still coming in the box around vaccine and being vaccinated, and those who are vaccinated being able to visit, and those who aren't, they can't. I know this is a forever moving topic that's going on. Margaret Sharp from Skills for Care has posted something in the chat box about hesitancy in regards to taking the vaccine amongst your staff. I guess, once again, we've mentioned that some employers potentially are saying that it's going to be made mandatory for staff to take the vaccine. You may not have the actual answer right now. I don't expect CQC not to answer, but is there something in place regarding to the vaccine and the amount of people being vaccinated, staff being vaccinated within care homes that CQC are going to be looking at all?
Well, I mean, vaccination of staff, of adult social care staff in London is an issue. It's below the national average, and I know it is a huge focus for all the system leaders about how we increase that. And I think CQC have got a smaller part to play because we're not part of the program. We're not administering the program, but we're there to encourage and understand, or to try to understand what are the barriers and if there's anything we can do personally. I think we just need to. We're going to take what I would perceive, what I think is a sensible and pragmatic approach. If there's a service that is not, or the vaccination rates for their staff is very low, there may well be that an inspector will contact to try to understand the reasons for that. But I'm not going to suggest that's going to happen on every occasion, because there's something like 3,000 services in London, so we're not going to get around to everyone. But where there is a particular outbreak, or if there's a particular concern, then you may well get contacted, or it may well trigger an inspection. I don't know. It will depend on a variety of factors. But whatever your thoughts are on mandatory vaccinations, I'd say I can't comment on that because it's out of consultation. We haven't formed a view, but I think it's that conversation about how do we encourage staff to be vaccinated and try and debunk some of the myths that are flying out there around social media. And I've seen things where I'm not having a jab because I'm going to get a microchip stuck in me and I'll be monitored. And I think, well, you're carrying an iPhone around. That's probably not that different. But if you think, get rid of your phone. So it's about having those sort of adult conversations about how you sort of allay those fears, and actually how do you influence staff, the staff that could influence other staff to actually say, well, they've had it, so that must be okay. I'll have a vaccine. So that's another thing, is how you approach that with your teams.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very difficult area, and we could probably go on all day about it. And my understanding is that if through the tracker, the authorities in that sense find that you've got less than 25% staff vaccinated, then somebody will be in touch with that organisation. But I'm also aware that some people, for some reason or another, have not completed the tracker. So in fact, their staff vaccination rates are higher than, in theory, it can be. But with some organisations, frankly, we have found that the greater influence on the staff is not either the manager or the owner, but it's their local cultural lead, be that a religious or a cultural body. And if that group or individual says getting a vaccine is a good thing, then they happily go off and have it done. And I have to say, I'm having my second one later today, and we were very keen to get that jab done because I think it does afford protection. And I appreciate the point that's made that some younger people can't or are not being allowed to visit because they have not yet had their vaccination. But frankly, if you ask, and the actual ability to get vaccination seems to vary enormously. And sometimes if you simply rock up at wherever it is, the vaccination centre, and ask, have they got any spares, towards the end of the day, they are inoculating people because they don't want them to go to waste.
Yeah. I think it's really important. I think, Neil, I know you said you've got to go shortly. Is there anything you want to round up with before you get to go and share for us, for, I guess, a take home for all the people that have come onto this call?
Okay, well, first, thank you for listening to me waffle on for the last hour and a quarter. And I know I won't have answered all your questions or allayed all your fears, but if there are particular things, please do get in contact with Peter, and I can, even if you group all the themes of what the issues are, I can try and answer them. takeaway message for me is well-being has to be a focus. Is an important focus. We can't lose sight of supporting our staff, supporting your staff to do the best that they can, making sure that they're providing the right care to the people that you support, because it will make a difference to them and an impact on their ability to do it well. So please just have a think about how you can not change the culture, sorry, how you can create the culture that is going to help you do your jobs. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on how I manage my teams and the teams that they manage, and to just try and get to the point where I'm seen as someone who is approachable and they can talk to and they can raise issues with. And I think a bit of self-reflection is always a good thing. And also, for me, is particularly when you're dealing with us, is if you've got a particular concern or you're not happy about something, then be brave, challenge it in the right way. I wouldn't expect you to be jumping up and down in front of Inspector, but just have that conversation, because what we want to do, we all want the same thing. We all want people to get the care that I know people are delivering, which is good care. And the last point for me really is just thank you to all you and all your teams for all the hard work and the sacrifices and stresses and strains that you've been through in the last 14 months. You can't underestimate the impact of it. And yeah, big thank you from me.
Thank you very much. Neil, once again.
No problem. I'm now going to have to dip out, I'm afraid, but lovely to see you all. And I will look forward to the next one.
Thank you very much, Neil. We will be in touch.
All right. Take care.
Excellent.
Thanks all.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. I'm just going to briefly launch a quick poll, which is in progress. And it's about, surprise, surprise, compulsory vaccination. And this has bounced around. And just let us know, because I know that there's a lot of comment about this. And I know that people have their concerns, and we have had a lot of conversations about this, but the results are coming in, and there's a sort of feeling in the background that if compulsory vaccination happens for COVID, then will it be flu jabs, and what will be next, and why is social care being targeted when no one seems to be mentioning that the NHS is going to be subject to compulsory vaccination. But I know that we have Margaret Sharp with us, and I would say to you that there's some fantastic information on the Skills for Care website with regard to CQC inspections. And some of the stuff on there, which is free, is very, very good. And you don't need anything else. You don't need to buy expensive things. You can get it for nothing from Skills for Care. And you need, as an organization, it does surprise me how many people do not sign up to newsletters from the likes of CQC, Skills for Care. They don't view regularly websites like NICE or Sky, where again, it's huge amounts of very useful information that, as organizations, you will find very useful. Okay, I think we've had a couple of minutes of the poll.
Yeah, the poll does look interesting, and I think we sort of stopped sharing. One thing I would add is that there is a lot of development in our sector, and it seems for some strange reason social care has been the guinea pig for everything presently: PPEs, testing, visiting, vaccines, and it's all lumped on us. There are lots of consultations for us to have our say. I believe this one is open till I think mid-May, of people to get their feedback in of what they feel about this taking place and going forward. One bugbear I have is that a lot of the time we're all so busy before we blink, something comes into force or regulation, or something is made legal because we don't speak up. Part and parcel of what LCAS is trying to do, facilitate meetings like this, if it's once a month, where we can get together and really have our say and make a point. That's the point of CQC being here. We're actually having something to say to CQC, rather than they make it up without our say so. Peter, I mean, the results of the poll are quite interesting. I'll leave you to sort of like ponder on the feedback. He's on mute, which is another wonderful thing.
I just posed that very quickly, and in a way I'm surprised that as many people as do think that you know, they should be, you know, compulsory, because that's slightly different to what I've heard verbally. But I'm, you know, I am interested, and we will take it forward and try and get as much information for people as possible. I know we're running on time-wise. There are several things that are on offer at the moment. One of the things that we have been working with SLAM is that SLAM have now put together a portal, and I will copy this. Oops.
So whilst Peter's copying that, he's probably not giving us as much credit as possible. We were kind enough to work with SLAM, South London, Maudsley Hospital Trust, Mental Hospital Trust, where we were able to work at mental health and wellbeing amongst staff and social care staff in South East London and all the boroughs in South East London. It was an initiative which really looked at how staff have coped, what they've dealt with. They've been stressed, anxious, depression, all factors across all managers, across all settings. And that could have been learning this, it could have been dom care, care homes, nursing homes, and really felt how the feedback has been, not just for managers, but staff. And it was really interesting of the feedback that we found. We also did was, we felt that always, most of the time, the NHS are the ones who always benefit from it. So there were training and tools tailor-made for social care for staff, things such as specific wellbeing champion training, MOTs for providers, learning sets, groups. And I personally also did specific things around cultural needs for those from Black, Asian and ethnic groups as well, which have made up probably maybe up to 60% of some of the workforce, and really seeing how they've coped, tackling things like taboos and other matters. The key of this is that it's been ongoing, and we've really had a lot of work and that we've done, but it still is ongoing where we're able to interact. So Peter probably can share some of the things that are available presently that we're doing. We've given you a survey, but we've also had specific training which you can use within your workforce and going forward. And this touches on some of the cultural changes and thoughts that actually Neil, the inspector, had said, which a lot of workplaces haven't done. We also were kind enough to have actually played a part in creating a portal for your staff and you to go on to and really have a look of the needs that you have. The good thing about the portal is you can do it in your own time, after work, staff, and it's everything from managers for those on the ground level as well, all staff. So it's really been really interesting, and one of probably the initiatives up and down the country, one of the ones which is really tailored for social care staff. So I think it's really fantastic, but it also touches on the mental well-being of your staff on a day-to-day basis, and it's something that we can all play a part in.
The portal, we're really pleased with the way the portal's going. Yes, it's not perfect, but if you look at it, the one caveat at the moment is that they don't have the live chat and phone line are not yet staffed, but they will be shortly. But if you look at the portal, there's a huge amount of really useful stuff on there. And one of the things that we've heard quite a lot of is that there isn't enough grief counselling. And they have it available. It's free, and they have got staff happy to do that for you. So, and we hear from staff that they're unhappy about lack of support after, you know, clients or residents have died. So it's another way of hanging on to staff. And we will send some more information out. We're actually running out of time. We've got several more meetings. Dudley has organised 2 culturally diverse BAME meetings for May. And we've also got a tendering meeting coming up, and another meeting about supporting the workforce. But rather than cram them all into the chat, we'll send out information.
Peter, you share just the LCAS news email in website address, newsletter? So this is where you can either sign up or get updates, or we'll keep you posted. We'll also post onto the group this recording as well, and also any information that comes from it and all the information that you may ask. You can also post questions to us directly via email, and also there is a WhatsApp group that is also available as well, which we will share in amongst us as well. So Peter, if you add that directly, that would be great.
Okay, thanks Dudley, well reminded. I've just popped that in. There's a huge amount of stuff on the news page. Some of it does get repeated, but also a bit like PPE, it seems to have been updated every other day for about 10 days, then went back to where it was in the beginning. And we are expecting further PPE updates as well. So we try and keep it as up to date as possible. If you spot something missing, let me know and we'll try and find out about it. But as I say, and we also put information about events spread throughout the website. Dudley will repeat them on WhatsApp. So, you know, if we can do something, let us know. If you want to give us money to do that, even better. Dudley and I'll share it between us. We do appreciate your time. We appreciate the pressures. And you know, do keep checking back. We will circulate. I'm sorry if you think there's too many emails coming out, but we will send emails out with regard to the next events. And we look forward to seeing you there.
And also, before everyone goes, I know we're going to run out of time. Really, you can speak to others on the group. There's lots of other people here who have a lot of information that can be with. So you can post questions like a WhatsApp group and you will get feedback as well. But thank you everyone for joining. It's been really great having you here, and stay safe, take care, and look after yourself.
Okay, and once again, thanks very much. And as Dudley says, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you again. And hopefully when you've all had both your injections. On that happy note, cheers for now. Bye-bye.
No.